Hey, humans. Um, I wanted to share some thoughts from church this morning while they're fresh on my mind. We were looking at First Kings, I think it was First Kings 17. It's the story of Elijah, uh, where essentially he confronts King Ahab. He has to go off into the wilderness, and the ravens provide for him, and there's a brook there that he drinks water from. And it talks about how the brook dries up, there's no more water, because at that time God had passed a judgment of no rain. And the Lord tells him to go to this widow's house in this other city. And I wanted to share some thoughts on that, and also some thoughts that were shared by Pastor Eddie this morning. And it was really interesting because he pointed out that there's times where essentially there's provision, and God's called you in a particular place, and that blessing is flowing, and then all of a sudden that blessing seems to dry up. And that's not necessarily because you're not in God's will or you've done something necessarily wrong. I mean, those can play into it, of course, but it could just mean that God's calling you to a different station, a different circumstance, or even a different location in life. And my thought that went along with that as well is that it's interesting because God provided for Elijah right there at the river, fed him via ravens and kept him safe during a time of judgment. Then he provided for Elijah in the house of a widow. If you guys know the story, they had a little bit of like flour or meal basically, and a little bit of oil, and the Lord allowed that to sustain them for quite some time. Even though it should have been used up in one session, it was God's provision still. And the other thought that wasn't addressed this morning was how later on in that Elijah's life, Elijah's exhausted, and he's in this cave. He's being pursued to be killed, and he just kind of wants to die almost. And the Lord provides for him from an angel. And I just think in walking with the Lord, the amount of time I have over these years, I've noticed that different seasons in life come with different forms of provision from the Father. Don't think that you're outside of His will. If He was providing one way and His work in your life was one way, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a different season and it seems like His presence is different, or His work in your heart and mind or in the people around you or your circumstances is different. That doesn't mean you're necessarily out of His will. It just means different seasons in life, God has different ways speaking with us, leading us, providing for us. So those were just some of my thoughts from this morning. One other thought would be that also Elijah was a man who he sought after God throughout his life. So how would I put it? Oftentimes people use the word faith and it gets mocked as though it's a sense of just blindly trusting something, like, I don't know anything about it, but I just have faith. And actually biblical faith is better rendered trust, really. So Elijah had set himself aside before the Lord many times in his life so that his heart and mind were prepared for the massive trials that would be ahead of him, and the wonders that God would work through his life in the midst of those trials. So I would just encourage myself and everyone that we should all be taking some time, spending time and growing in our trust and our knowledge of Him each day. And when those big times hit, when calamity hits, or even when blessing hits, we know how to walk in Him and trust Him and react appropriately. So hope everyone has a good morning. Maybe you're having a 3-day weekend like I am. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah.